Well, good morning again, everyone. Blessings to you on this autumn day. A conversation I was having with my mom the weekend before this. If you remember, my mom is a teacher of many years and now retired, and her dear friend, is a retired nurse. And my mother, in our conversation, was recalling a conversation she had with this retired nurse friend. And it had to do with what kids these days wore to school, as in the friend has a teenage granddaughter. And so my mom was just observing from the conversation that shorts were quite short and crop tops common. And once again, there seems to be holes in everything. My mom wasn't judging per se. You should see what she wore in the 60s. I'm just saying. But she was observing. But those observations were enough, a trigger for me. Well, because we're mother and daughter, and what isn't a trigger, honestly. But more than that, the content of what she was saying set off in me this like multi-complex layers of decades of feelings around my own body. As an athlete, sculpted by coaches and trainers, as a woman, analyzed and judged in lockstep with my professional capacities, as a mother, having once born new life, now facing how I'm going to teach those very lives about their bodies as puberty is knocking on the door and it's never too early to teach about consent. I came across Sonia Rene Taylor's work for the first time during the pandemic. I think it was this quote that really first put her on my radar, and not if you can see it on your screen. I always don't know. She was talking about what it meant to be, what was normal. We were longing to get back to normal. And Taylor says this, I might have shared this with you already, but it's good. We will not go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal, other than we normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. We should not long to return, my friends. We're being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature. There's such amazing and obvious truth here. Who was this wisdom figure, I wondered. I began to seek out her work, and that's how I came across her book, The Body is Not an Apology, The Power of Radical Self-Love. And in it, Taylor really changes the way that I looked at my own body, the body of others, and how any or all bodies are connected to issues of justice. Because her work begins with this sentiment that is so obvious and yet so unrealized, that there is no wrong way to have a body. There's no wrong way to have a body. There are no bad bodies. Well, sure, we say. You have to be like blatantly superficial or kind of a jerk to argue differently. But isn't that the way wisdom works? When someone points out something that is so among us, yet so true and apparent, but if it were, why wouldn't we all be living like it was true? Taylor asserts that it is this radical self-love that is going to change the world, ultimately. And she bases this all from the premise of natural intelligence, which defined by Merriam-Williamson is akin to an acorn, right? That an acorn does not have to think too hard about becoming an oak tree. It just is and will be that. It can and be no other. Similarly, Taylor preaches a gospel of body grace that tells us all that we are enough. We can and are in our bodies that we were destined to be. And there's no reason to apologize for being in the body you're in, and honoring and loving your body, in fact, is a first step in honoring and loving every body or everybody. Over a decade ago already, Taylor found herself uttering the words that would launch this movement for the first time. She was speaking to a friend with a disability who had had a misadventure with an intimate partner. And Taylor utters these words to her. She says, Natasha, your body is not an apology. It's not something you give to someone and say, sorry for my disability. And Taylor has, in her this movement, in this book, she's gotten me to thinking, how do each of us apologize for having a body? In seminary, an older female ministry professor advised us in the kindest of ways to think about our wardrobe choices as women going into ordained ministry. Not that this was a good reality to have to think about, but she reminded us that it was there. See, she, Connie, had lived and served in Africa for many years. And when she came back to the States, she just loved wearing these earrings, these beautiful earrings that she acquired while she was there. And they were big and wonderful. But inevitably, that wardrobe choice came with a cost. In the ministry she was in, people in worship just had to comment on them. It's like they didn't know another way to relate to her. Never mind the sermon she had spent hours of her week crafting, or the other ministerial matters she had attended to with grace and professionalism throughout the week. What did they want to talk about Sunday, at coffee hour? Her earrings and other wardrobe choices. Apologizing for a body can look like wearing the pearls instead of the hoops, getting that conservative haircut or getting rid of the dreads, wearing Spanx to hide the curves, or covering up a tattoo to look professional. Minuscule ways that, under the guise of propriety, in many ways make us apologize for being in the body we're in. From Taylor's Social Locations, she says this: living in a female body, a Black body, an aging body, a fat body, a body with mental illness, is to awaken daily to a planet that expects a certain set of apologies to already live on our tongues. There's a level of not enough or too much sewn into these strands of difference. What if, Taylor challenges us all, what if none of us had to apologize for being in the body we're in, and we didn't make others do that either? Taylor begins with bodies because as she sees it, it's the only thing that is not up for debate. Are we spiritual beings, she asks? Well, depends on who you ask. Do humans have a soul? We've been fighting about that since Aristotle. But she reminds us, we each have bodies. And when we talk about things like violence or poverty or injustice, this is not just abstraction. These are things that happen to bodies. She had me reflecting that, when you stop to think about it, could it be summed up that all of these isms and a handful of phobias, whether it's ableism, racism, ageism, transphobia, homophobia, could they have their roots in humans simply trying to make peace with bodies? And if it's peace that we're lacking, Taylor invites us all to wonder, when is it that this war begins? When does the war with our bodies begin? When was it that you began to battle with your own body, I wonder? When did you stop listening to your body or stop loving it? It happens early. Taylor points out that there is not a toddler on earth that does not love their bodies, their cushy little bellies and their roly-poly thighs, right? Where does it come from, this body shame? Is it in adolescence or puberty or situations of diversity? When you become aware of difference and you are led to assume that there's a way that your body should look. And this was reinforced by familial, social, cultural, political messaging and was attached to a story or belief about your value or your worth in the world. Is it the 7-year-old who's called fat and starts dieting? Or when the little girl says, as I was, that you can't go topless when you're playing basketball with your boy, with your brothers, because, that's somehow, dirty. Or when a boy gets called a chicken for being too skinny, or a Black boy gets called chocolate amongst his white classmates. When my own fourth grader this week, for a moment, there was a small blemish on her chin, and it was picture day. And there were about 15 minutes where she didn't want to go to school because of that thing on her chin. Taylor names that we live in a world of default bodies, as she calls it. Default bodies. These, as she explains it, are the bodies we imagine when we close our eyes. It's what we've been bombarded with as the norm for so long, it's just ingrained. What is the default in America? Taylor names the default body is white, able-bodied, cisgendered, fit, healthy, not wrinkly, and probably male too. And as Taylor points out, the further you digress from that, the more barriers are erected, the more apologies you're expected to give. Yes, the default body can change over time. It morphs to fit power structures. But Taylor names here why, I think for myself, I've been so sensitive around allowing my girls to play with Barbie dolls, or why I try to point out that those cartoons with the huge cat eyes and the like hairpin waists are just artist renderings. Especially living in a mixed race family, I wonder, I worry about what the default is that my daughters are absorbing. At the same time, as open-minded as I think I am, Taylor has helped me realize how much judgment I do harbor, both around myself and others, and how we show up in our bodies. Taylor lifts up the work of Dr. Deb Burgard, who talks about the danger of poodle science. I don't know if you've heard about that. Poodle science. As in, what if we judged the health of all dogs by comparing them to the size and the health of poodles? Or that all dogs should look and eat and be the same size as poodles? It's absurd, right? And yet, here's this new term that I learned and have been guilty of, if not out loud in my own internal judgment, health trolling. Health trolling. Have you ever thought of this? Health trolling can look like a complete stranger, or you might even know them better, who is perhaps larger bodied than you or someone, and saying in a social media post or to a mutual acquaintance or even to their face, I just want them to be healthy. I just want them to be healthy. Taylor points out that how damaging this can be, right? Our insistence that all bodies, right, should not only live up to the default, but also should be healthy. She says this: health is not a state we owe the world. We are no less valuable, worthy, or lovable because we are not healthy. Lastly, there's no standard of health that is achievable for all bodies. Our belief that there should be anchors the systematic oppression of ableism and reinforces the notion that people with illness and disabilities have defective bodies rather than different bodies. I wonder what you have been taught throughout your life about having a body, having the body you're in, to fit what standard? That if you became injured, disabled, or sick, would you be of less value? That you had to keep your body pure or try to perfect it? Or that your body always had to be strong? That you should stuff down your emotion and make the body submit to your will, mind over matter? That your body was disconnected entirely from spirit or soul? That the signs of aging were not signs of wisdom, hard won, but marks of irrelevancy meant to be Botoxed or creamed over? Taylor has helped me to see is that this radical self-love, it's more than self-acceptance, which is like baseline. And it's more than self-confidence, right? Because even narcissists have lots of that in droves. Rather, radical self-love is a deep and abiding sense of enoughness, belovedness, and that is the starting point of so much. Again, as Taylor says, how we value and honor our bodies impacts how we value and honor the bodies of others. How we value and honor our bodies impacts how we value and honor the bodies of others. And all of this finds effects in the realm of power. As she points out, the power to create laws allows and endows governments with the power to influence which bodies we accept as quote unquote normal and which we do not, all through the validation of legality. She invites us to question, how do governments use their power to ensure all bodies are treated equally? She gives us a few stats shared from a global perspective in her research. She reminds us that 76 countries still have laws criminalizing homosexuality, 5 of which the death penalty could be applied. Immigrants can be deported from New Zealand for having a BMI of over 35. And in Greece, a 2012 measure allowed police to detain people suspected of being HIV positive and force them to be tested. And the same measure also encouraged landlords to evict tenants who would be HIV positive. And in our own country, how the government regulates bodies continues, right? We know in the ever fluctuating debates and laws around abortion or transgendered rights, it gets tricky when we start to talk mandating vaccines or not wearing our masks as infringing on the rights of Americans with disabilities. It's there. Power and policy and government and what we think of bodies and how we regulate them. And for Taylor, what she's brought up to me, what we might have kept as this heady, abstract concept like sexism or fat phobia or these isms, she names as body-based oppression or even body terrorism. She sees it happening in the systems and the government, in which types of laws are enacted and who's represented in leadership, right? And she says this, our beliefs about bodies disproportionately impact those whose race, gender, sexual orientation, ability, and age deviate from our default notions. The further from that default, the greater the impact. We are all affected, but not equally. And as she points out later in the book, this can be to tragic circumstances. Why do we live in a world where a trans day of remembrance is even necessary? This is a beginning of an introduction to the work of a true poet and an activist, a wisdom figure in our day. Taylor offers these concrete ways to live into radical self-love, but that's her wisdom to share and her gratuity to collect. Just going to show you two of her websites here. The Body is Not an Apology as a website, and a kind of a movement education articles. And then her own website, Sonia Rene Taylor, is just filled with wisdom. But the beginning of what she gives all of us, I think in just this short introduction, I think what Taylor is giving us is a new lens or new language, how it is all about bodies, not abstractions. And what if we were to begin with the premise that there are no bad bodies, that the default body changes and often coincides with power structures, that there is no one standard of health achievable to all people, that learning to accept and not shame and radically love our own bodies is key to doing so with others. I wonder what just this knowledge could do if we really believed and worked to make it a part of the culture we all swim in. The bottom line is, this is my own theology of bodies. I believe that each of us are blessed to be a blessing. Whatever body we are in, we care for them and we treat them with honor, not to fit a standard or find value intrinsic to ourselves, but rather because the value of each of our bodies is a given. And others need the love we can give through them by showing up just as we are. So blessings to you this week. And when I say you, I mean the body that you are in. You find sacred belovedness inherent to you there, which always is available to radiate outward in love towards other and your community. Amen.